The pen slipped from trembling fingers and fell to the floor of the conference room with a sharp clack that echoed like a gunshot. On the 42nd floor of the Aerotech Dynamics corporate building in Chicago, the 15 best aeronautical engineers in the country stared blankly at a whiteboard covered in incorrect equations, confusing diagrams and arrows that pointed to nowhere. Edward Stanton, the company's CEO and founder, gripped the edge of the glass table so tightly his knuckles were white. At 58, the entrepreneur who had built an aerospace empire from a small hangar in Wichita, Kansas, had never faced such a devastating crisis. Tears of despair streamed down his face, normally impassive during multi-million-dollar negotiations. "We have 36 hours, he said, his voice breaking. "If we don't solve the flight control system problem for the Condor X project, we lose the contract with Stratodyne Aerospace. We lose everything, 5,000 jobs, 20 years of work. Our international reputation." The silence in the room was suffocating. Sarah Jennings, the chief engineer and Edward's right-hand woman for 15 years, looked at her notes with a defeated expression. Beside her, Robert Fisher, an avionics specialist, shook his head slowly. "We've tried 17 different approaches," Robert muttered. "The system keeps conflicting with the pilot's commands during turbulence. It's as if the aircraft has a mind of its own." "The FAA investigation is scheduled for tomorrow," Sarah added. "If we don't present a solution, the project will be officially cancelled. And that's not all. Our certification to develop new systems could be revoked." Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decades of work crumbling. His company had revolutionized American aviation, created technologies exported worldwide, but now a simple software bug threatened to destroy it all. "Maybe we should accept defeat," Sarah sighed. "We've already spent 2 years and $80 million trying to fix this." "No," Edward slammed his fist on the table. "I will not let 20 years of work turn to dust. There has to be a solution. There has to be." At that moment, a small voice cut through the heavy air in the room. A child's voice. "I can fix it." Every head turned toward the door. Leaning against the frame was a frail boy, no older than 9, with worn-out clothes and shoes with holes in them. His brown hair was unkempt. There was dirt under his small fingernails, and he carried a school backpack patched with duct tape. Security guards were already moving toward him, but Edward raised a hand. "Wait." The boy showed no fear. His large, bright brown eyes were fixed on the airplane diagram on the board, as if it were a puzzle that finally made sense to him. "I can fix it," he repeated, his voice firmer now. "The problem is in the calibration of the attitude sensors. The system is reacting too quickly to normal fluctuations." The room erupted in murmurs. One of the younger engineers laughed nervously. "Edward, with all due respect, this is ridiculous. A street kid can't—" "Silence." Edward stood up, his eyes fixed on the boy. There was something in that child's gaze, an intelligence that shone like a diamond in the rough. "How did you get up here, kid?" "The emergency stairs," the boy answered simply. "I saw everyone running around worried. I heard the conversations in the elevator about planes with problems." "I understand planes." Sarah approached with skepticism. "You understand planes? Where did you learn that?" The boy opened his worn backpack and pulled out a thick, battered book. "Principles of Aeronautical Engineering" by Andrew S. Miller. The pages were yellowed, the cover peeling, but there were meticulous notes in the margins in a neat, childish handwriting. "I found it in the trash behind the municipal library," he explained. "Someone threw it out during a renovation. I've read it 16 times. Edward took the book carefully. It was a university-level technical edition, extremely complex even for graduate engineers. He flipped through the pages and found detailed drawings of control systems, hand-derived equations and diagrams that demonstrated a profound understanding of flight principles. "My God," he whispered. "Who drew this?" "I did," the boy answered, blushing slightly. "When I don't understand something, I draw it until it makes sense. Dad taught me that before he went to heaven." Edward's heart ached. "What's your name, son?" "Gabriel Stone," the boy said, straightening his shoulders with childish pride. "I live at the St. Teresa's shelter, but during the day I stay at the library or near here, watching the planes take off from the airport. And you think you can solve a problem our best engineers haven't been able to for 2 years?" Gabriel nodded with the innocent confidence of a child. "Can I try? Jesus gave me a good brain for math. Dad always said God doesn't give us talents to keep them hidden. Edward looked at his team, then at the boy. In 40 years of his career, he had learned to recognize genius when he saw it, and he was seeing it now in the eyes of an orphan. "Give him a marker," Edward ordered. "This is madness," Sarah protested. "We can't entrust the future of the company to a child who understands our systems better than we do." Edward interrupted her. "Sarah, look at this book. Look at these notes. This boy is not ordinary." Gabriel approached the whiteboard. Even on his tiptoes, he could barely reach the upper part. Robert moved, brought a chair for him to stand on. "Thank you, sir," Gabriel said politely, climbing onto the chair. For a moment, he just observed the complex diagram. His little head tilted to the side like a baby bird studying a problem. Then he started to erase. With small, precise movements, he removed the conflicting arrows the engineers had drawn, erased unnecessary equations, and cleared the mess of lines crossing the aircraft's drawing. Next, he started to draw. First, a small circle on the wing labeled Primary Attitude Sensor. Then 2 smaller circles, Backup Sensor A and Backup Sensor B. With delicate lines, he connected the 3 sensors to a central box he labeled Processing Center. "The problem," Gabriel explained with the seriousness of a university professor, but the high-pitched voice of a child, "is that the plane's computer is only listening to one sensor. When it gets nervous in turbulence, it makes the plane fight the pilot." He drew small arrows, representing data flowing from the sensors to the processing center. "But if we make the computer listen to all 3 sensors together," he continued, drawing a triangle connecting the 3 points, "it stays calmer. Like when Aunt Marcia explains I should listen to 3 people before believing gossip at the shelter." A few engineers smiled, despite the tension. The simple analogy made a concept they had needlessly complicated crystal clear. Gabriel wrote on the board, "Rule of 3 friends. If 2 sensors agree and 1 disagrees, ignore the different one. If they all disagree, ask the pilot." "And for strong turbulence?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious now. Gabriel drew a small box labeled Kindness Filter. "When the plane shakes a lot, instead of panicking, the computer counts to 3 before doing anything big. Like when I get mad at someone at the shelter. Aunt Marcia taught me to count to 10 before I speak." He added a simple equation. "Wait 0.3 seconds. Check 3 times makes wiser decision." The room was in absolute silence. 15 brilliant minds, graduates of the world's best universities, looked at the elegant and simple solution created by a 9-year-old child with an incomplete basic education. "This," Robert swallowed hard, "this could actually work. It's genius in its simplicity," Sarah whispered. "Why didn't we think of this?" Gabriel climbed down from the chair and looked shyly at Edward. "Can I go now? The librarian, Mrs. Carmen, gets worried if I'm late." Edward knelt in front of the boy, bringing himself to eye level. "Gabriel, you just saved my company. You saved the jobs of 5,000 people. How can I thank you?" The boy thought for a moment, shuffling his bare feet inside his torn shoes. "Can you let me see the test? I want to know if it worked. I've never seen a real airplane work from the inside." Edward smiled through his tears. "Of course you can. But first tell me something. Where are your parents?" Gabriel's smile faltered. "Dad died of cancer when I was 6. Mom couldn't handle being alone and left. She said she'd come back, but it's been 3 years." Edward's heart broke. "And since then I've lived at St. Teresa's shelter. The director, Mrs. Beatrice, is very good to me. And I have Jesus." He touched a small wooden cross hanging from a worn string around his neck. "Dad taught me that Jesus never abandons orphans." Edward had to fight to keep from crying in front of the boy. "Gabriel, would you like to see your solution tested in our flight simulator?" Gabriel's eyes lit up like stars. "Can I really?" "You can. And afterward, I want to have a very serious talk with you about your future." 2 hours later, in the Aerotech Dynamics Simulation Lab, Gabriel sat in a chair that was too high for him, his little legs dangling in the air, watching in fascination as engineers implemented his solution into the flight control software. "Initiating flight simulation in adverse conditions," announced the lead technician. On the giant screen in front of them, a virtual plane took off in the middle of a simulated storm. Crosswinds, severe turbulence, conditions that had broken the system dozens of times before. Gabriel bit his lower lip, his small hands clasped in silent prayer. First severe turbulence in 3, 2, 1. The virtual aircraft shuddered on the screen. The numbers on the monitors danced wildly, but this time, instead of the usual chaos, the systems remained stable. The kindness filter worked perfectly, preventing abrupt reactions. The rule of 3 friends maintained the balance between the sensors. Incredible, Robert muttered. The parameters are all within normal ranges. Second test, extreme turbulence with sensor failure, the technician continued. Again, the system responded wisely. When one sensor failed, the other 2 harmoniously took control, exactly as Gabriel had predicted. It worked! Sarah shouted, unable to contain herself. Edward, it worked! The room exploded in applause. Engineers who had spent sleepless nights for months hugged each other. Edward knelt again beside Gabriel, who was watching everything with wide-eyed admiration. Gabriel, do you have any idea what you just did? The boy shook his head, still processing the emotion around him. You saved our company. You saved thousands of jobs, and more importantly, you will save the lives of people who will fly in planes with this technology. Gabriel smiled, that pure, genuine smile that only children possess. Jesus must be happy. Dad always said he's happy when we use our gifts to help people. Edward couldn't hold back anymore. Tears rolled freely down his face as he hugged the boy. Gabriel, I want to make you a proposition. What kind of proposition? I want you to come live with me and my wife. I want to give you the best education money can buy. I want you to have everything you deserve. Gabriel pulled back slightly, confused, but I have nothing to give you in return. You have something far more valuable than money, Edward smiled through his tears. You have a gift from God, and I want to help you develop it. The boy looked around the room at all the important adults watching him with respect and admiration. For the first time in 3 years, since his mother had abandoned him at the shelter's door with only a small suitcase and a false promise of return, Gabriel felt truly valued. Can I think about it? He asked shyly. Of course you can, Edward smiled. But first, how about we have lunch together? I know a place that makes the best burger in Chicago. As they walked toward the elevator, Gabriel held Edward's large hand with his small one. Mr. Stanton? Yes? Do you think my parents would be proud of me? Edward stopped in the middle of the hallway, knelt once more and looked directly into the boy's eyes. I'm absolutely certain they would be, Gabriel. I'm sure that wherever they are overflowing with pride. Gabriel nodded confidently and touched his small wooden cross again. Dad told me Jesus always has a plan. I think this was his plan for today. Edward smiled, feeling his heart fill with a sensation he had forgotten existed since he was a child himself. Pure, genuine hope. I think you're right, son. I think you're right. And as they descended in the glass elevator, watching the city of Chicago stretch endlessly below them, neither Edward nor Gabriel knew that this would be just the first of many adventures awaiting them, that this was just the first time a child's innocent faith would forever change the lives of powerful people, and that on the other side of the city, in shadowy offices and envious hearts, other people had noticed what had happened at Aerotech Dynamics that day. People who would not be satisfied seeing a poor boy receive everything they believed they deserved for themselves. But for now, as Edward took Gabriel to see the world that would soon be his by right, only joy mattered. The joy of an orphan boy who had discovered his gifts truly had value, and the joy of a powerful man who had rediscovered that true wealth wasn't in his bank accounts, but in the opportunity to make a difference in the life of a special child. 3 weeks had passed since that afternoon that changed everything at Aerotech Dynamics. Gabriel woke up in the softest bed he had ever slept in a room larger than the entire dormitory at the St. Teresa's shelter. Silk curtains let in golden rays of morning sun that danced on the light blue walls. His favorite color, Edward had discovered, after a conversation about clouds and the sky. The boy sat on the edge of the bed, his bare feet touching the plush carpet, still getting used to the silence. At the shelter, he woke every day to crying babies, the loud conversations of the caretakers, and the constant noise of 23 children sharing the same space. Here in the Stanton mansion in Lincoln Park, only the distant song of birds broke the morning peace. He carefully put on his new St. Francis preparatory school uniform. Navy blue trousers, a pristine white shirt and a tie he still struggled to knot correctly. Each piece cost more money than he had ever seen in his life. But Edward had insisted, "You deserve the best, son." Son. The word still warmed his heart every time Edward said it. Gabriel went down the marble staircase, sliding his hand along the polished banister. In the dining room, he found Edward drinking coffee while reading technical reports, glasses on the tip of his nose, a concentrated expression that Gabriel had already learned to recognize. "Good morning, Papa Edward," Gabriel said shyly. He still hesitated to use the word Papa, but Edward always smiled when he heard it. "Good morning, my boy." Edward opened his arms and Gabriel ran to receive the morning hug that had become a ritual between them. "Did you sleep well?" "I did. I dreamed I was flying the Condor X. I flew over the clouds and waved to my dad in heaven." Edward felt a lump in his throat. In their 3 weeks together, every innocent word from Gabriel touched some deep fiber in his heart. I'm sure he waved back. "Son." During breakfast served by Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who already treated Gabriel like her own grandson, Edward watched in wonder as the boy absorbed information from everything around him. Gabriel studied the texture of the bread roll, asked about the coffee roasting process, wanted to understand why sugar dissolved faster in hot liquids. "Papa Edward, can I ask a question?" "You can always ask, Gabriel." "Why doesn't Mr. Damon like me?" Edward paused with his cup in midair. Marcus Damon, his vice president of engineering for 12 years, had shown obvious discomfort with Gabriel's presence at the company. "What makes you think that?" "Yesterday, when I went to the lab with you, he looked at me like I was a weird animal. And when I explained the modification to the landing system, he said any trained monkey could have had the same idea." Edward's blood boiled, but he kept his voice calm. "Some people take time to accept change, Gabriel. Marcus has worked with me for a long time, and maybe he feels uncomfortable with new situations." Gabriel nodded, thoughtfully chewing his bread with jam. "My dad taught me that Jesus also faced people who didn't like him. He said we should love them anyway. Your father was a wise man." "He was. He worked in a mechanic's shop, but he knew a lot about planes. At night he would show me the stars and say that one day I would fly higher than them." Edward swallowed his emotion. Every fragment of Gabriel's story revealed a simple but deeply loving man who had planted extraordinary seeds in his son's mind before leaving too soon. The driver arrived to take them. Edward made a point of taking Gabriel to school personally every morning, turning the commute into a special moment between them. In the car, Gabriel pressed his nose against the window, watching the city awaken. "Papa Edward, when I grow up and become a real engineer, can I build planes to take poor children to see the world?" "You can, son." "You absolutely can." At St. Francis Preparatory School, one of Chicago's most prestigious institutions, Gabriel got out of the black Mercedes-Benz under the curious gazes of other students and parents. Some whispered. Everyone knew the story of the genius boy who had saved Edward Stanton's company. "Behave, study hard, and remember, you are here because you deserve it," Edward said, hugging Gabriel. "Thank you for believing in me," Gabriel replied, adjusting the new backpack on his shoulders. Now a blue Jansport, no longer patched with the tape he had brought from the shelter. Watching his adopted son walk into the school, Edward felt a mix of pride and worry. Gabriel was brilliant, but he was still a traumatized child trying to adapt to a completely new world. At Aerotech Dynamics, Edward arrived to find Marcus Damon waiting in his office, his expression tense and formal. "We need to talk," Marcus said without preamble. About this unsustainable situation you've created with this boy." Edward sat down slowly behind his desk, controlling his irritation. "Explain your concern, Marcus." "Edward, you've lost your sense of reality. You're treating a 9-year-old as if he's a senior engineer. Yesterday you consulted him about modifications to the Sabia project before consulting me. I am your vice president, and Gabriel is responsible for the solution that saved our company. It was luck. A kid made a guess that happened to work. That doesn't make him an expert." Edward stood up, his voice dangerously calm. "Marcus, Gabriel identified and solved a problem that you and your entire team couldn't solve in 2 years. That wasn't luck. You're being manipulated by a clever child who found a way out of poverty. In a few months, when the novelty wears off, you'll see you made a mistake. The only mistake I see here is your inability to recognize exceptional talent because of your wounded pride." Marcus stood up abruptly. "My pride, Edward? I built this company with you. I worked 70 hours a week for years to get us where we are. And now you're replacing my opinion with that of a child who was living in a shelter a month ago. No one is being replaced, Marcus. But if you continue to treat Gabriel with disrespect, then there will be changes in the company's structure. The vice president stormed out, slamming the door and leaving Edward with a bad feeling in his chest. He had known Marcus for 12 years, a competent man but also extremely ambitious and possessive of his position in the company. At 2 p.m., Edward's phone rang. On the other end, a tense female voice. "Mr. Stanton, this is a Parasida from the St. Francis school office. You need to come pick up Gabriel urgently." Edward felt his blood run cold. What happened? Is he hurt? Not physically, but there was an incident. It's best if you come right away. 15 minutes later, Edward was in the principal's office, where he found Gabriel sitting in a chair too big for him, staring at the floor, a red mark on his left cheek. What happened? Edward knelt beside the chair, examining the boy's face. The principal, Mrs. Helen Carter, sighed heavily. There was an altercation during recess. Gabriel and Rodrigo Mendez, Congressman Mendez's son, got into an argument. An argument that left a mark on my son's face. Gabriel finally lifted his eyes, which shone with unshed tears. He said I was a fake, that poor people don't have brains for engineering, that you were going to throw me out when you found out I was stupid. Edward's heart broke. And what did you do? I said Jesus gave me a good brain, and that my dad always believed in me. Then he pushed me and said my dad was a failure just like me. And then I fought back. Gabriel punched Rodrigo in the nose, the principal completed. Rodrigo reacted by slapping him in the face. Edward felt a contradictory mix of pride and worry. Now, normally this would be a suspension for both of them. But considering Gabriel is adjusting to a new situation and that Rodrigo clearly provoked it, I want to speak with Rodrigo's parents. Mr. Stanton, perhaps it's better to let this go. Congressman Mendez could create complications. Let him. Edward stood up, picking Gabriel up in his arms, despite the boy's shy protest that he was too big. No one is going to humiliate my son and get away with it. On the way home, Gabriel broke the silence. Papa Edward, was it wrong for me to hit Rodrigo? Edward drove in silence for a few seconds before answering. Violence is never the best solution, Gabriel. But defending your dignity and your father's memory, that I understand perfectly. He said very ugly things about Dad, and your father would be proud to see how you defended him. But next time, try to use your intelligence instead of your fists, okay? Clever words hurt ignorant people more than fists. Gabriel smiled for the first time since the incident. I'll remember that. That evening, during dinner, Gabriel was quieter than usual. Edward noticed the boy was playing with his food instead of eating. What are you thinking about, son? Papa Edward, what happens if the important people at school don't want me to study there? What if they decide that kids like me shouldn't be with rich kids? The question hit Edward like a punch to the stomach. Why are you worried about that? Because it's happened before. In the first shelter I was in, there was a rich family interested in adopting me. But when they found out I liked reading about math more than playing soccer, they said I was too intense for a normal child. Edward felt a silent fury burn in his chest. Gabriel, look at me. The boy raised his brown eyes, still vulnerable despite the brilliant intelligence they held. You are not going anywhere. You are my son now, and nobody, no congressman, no school, no powerful family, is going to take you from me or me from you. Understood? Gabriel nodded, but Edward could see that the wounds of abandonment ran too deep to be healed with words, no matter how sincere. You know what we're going to do tomorrow? Edward smiled, changing the tone. We're going to visit the Stratodine Aerospace factory in Everett. They want to meet you in person and show you how your solution is being implemented in the real planes. Gabriel's eyes lit up like stars. Can I see planes being built? You can, and maybe if you behave, they'll let you sit in the cockpit of a business jet. Gabriel practically jumped out of his chair, the sadness momentarily forgotten. Really? Can I really? You can, my little genius. You can. Later that night, after Gabriel had fallen asleep, Edward received an unexpected call. It was Sarah Jennings, his chief engineer, and she sounded worried. Edward, I need to tell you something. I had a strange visit at the office today. What kind of visit? 2 people identified themselves as being from Child Protective Services. They asked questions about Gabriel. if he was being intellectually exploited, if you were forcing him to work, if the adoption was being done through the proper legal channels. Edward felt a chill down his spine. What did you say? The truth, of course, that Gabriel is a happy, well-cared-for child, that his participation in the company is spontaneous and playful. But they seem to be looking for trouble, Edward. As if someone had coached them on what to ask. Someone reported me to CPS. It seems so. They mentioned receiving an anonymous tip about possible child exploitation. Edward, you need to be prepared. If someone powerful is behind this, Edward hung up the phone, his hands trembling with anger. He went upstairs silently and peeked in on Gabriel sleeping peacefully, hugging the small wooden cross that had belonged to his biological father. I will protect you, he whispered in the dark, no matter who tries to separate us. But deep in his heart, Edward knew the war was just beginning and that there were powerful people willing to destroy an orphan's happiness to protect their own interests. On the other side of the city, in a penthouse apartment on the Gold Coast, Marcus Damon hung up the phone after a long, calculated conversation. It's done, he said to the woman organizing papers on a mahogany desk. Child Protective Services has started the investigation. In a few weeks, Edward's circus with the boy wonder will be over. And then I take control of the company I helped build. Edward has lost focus. He's being manipulated by a child. It's time for someone more stable to make the decisions. Marcus didn't know that at that exact moment, Gabriel had woken up from a nightmare and had come downstairs for a glass of water. And that passing by the mansion's library, he overheard Edward on the phone with lawyers, talking about judicial protection and an accelerated adoption process. The 9-year-old boy, who had already lost everything once, understood instinctively that he was about to lose everything again. And for the first time since he had arrived in that house, Gabriel Stone wondered if God really didn't abandon orphans, or if he just took longer to arrive for some. The rain hammered against the windows of Edward's office with the typical violence of a Chicago March thunderstorm. He paced back and forth, the phone glued to his ear as he listened to his lawyer, Mr. Henry Monroe, explain the gravity of the situation. Edward, the complaint is more serious than we thought, said the tense voice on the other end. They allege you're using Gabriel as corporate propaganda, exposing a vulnerable child for commercial gain. There are also accusations that he's being deprived of a normal childhood. Edward stopped in front of the window, watching the gray city under the storm. That's ridiculous, Henry. Gabriel is the happiest child I've ever seen. He loves participating in the projects. I know that, you know that. But CPS has to investigate every complaint, and whoever filed this knows the legal system very well. They've included photographs of Gabriel in the lab, copies of newspaper articles about him, even a psychological analysis alleging signs of excessive pressure to perform. A psychological analysis? Where did they get that? Apparently someone hired a psychologist to observe Gabriel at school and write a report. It's all very well orchestrated, Edward. We're dealing with someone who has resources and legal knowledge. Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility. What do I need to do? First, Gabriel can no longer come to Aerotech until the investigation is over. Second, you will both need an independent psychological evaluation. Third, the adoption process will be temporarily suspended. Suspended? Edward's voice trembled. Henry, if Gabriel finds out he could be taken from me, calm down, Edward. It's just a precaution. But you need to tell him about the investigation before he hears it from another source. At that moment, Gabriel entered the office silently, still wearing his drenched school uniform. He had walked from school to the company in the rain, completely ignoring the driver who was waiting for him. Papa Edward! The boy's voice was small, almost a whisper. I need to talk to you. Edward quickly ended the call and knelt before Gabriel, grabbing a towel from a side table to dry his wet hair. What happened, son? Why didn't you go with Anthony? Gabriel hugged Edward with desperate force, burying his face in his chest. They're going to take me away, aren't they? Edward's heart nearly stopped. Who told you that? The principal called me into her office today. There were 2 women there. They said they were social workers. They asked a bunch of weird questions about how you treat me, if you force me to study math, if I have time to play. Gabriel pulled back a little, his brown eyes filled with tears. One of them asked if I knew that child exploitation was a crime. Edward felt a fierce anger burn in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Gabriel, look at me." The boy lifted his face, trying to hold back the tears. "Are you happy here with me?" "Happier than I've ever been in my whole life." "Do I force you to do anything you don't want to do?" "Never. You always ask if I want to help with the projects. Then don't worry. Some people who don't know us are asking questions, but it will pass." "You're not going anywhere." Gabriel nodded, but Edward could see the fear still present in his eyes. The fear of a child who had already lost everything once and knew how life could change in an instant. "Can I keep coming to the company?" Gabriel asked hopefully. Edward hesitated, hating to lie, but knowing the truth would be devastating. "For a few days, maybe it's better if you focus on your studies. How about we set up a lab at home? We can build a workshop in the basement." Gabriel's face lit up slightly. "With a real workbench and a microscope?" "With everything you need." But during dinner, Gabriel barely touched his food. He pushed the rice from one side of the plate to the other, lost in thoughts that seemed too heavy for a 9-year-old mind. "Gabriel, you need to eat," Edward said gently. "Papa Edward, can I ask a hard question?" "You can always." Gabriel took a deep breath as if preparing for something painful. "If they find out I'm a problem for you, would you send me back to the shelter?" The question struck Edward like lightning. He immediately stood up from his chair and went to Gabriel, picking him up in his arms despite the boy's protests. "Gabriel Stone Stanton," he said, using the full name the boy would officially adopt. "You will never ever, under any circumstances, be a problem for me. You are the best thing that has ever happened in my life. And even if the whole world turned against us, I would never ever abandon you. Understand?" Gabriel clung to Edward's neck, finally letting the tears fall. "I'm so scared of going back there, at the shelter at night. I would lie awake imagining what it would be like to have a real dad. Now that I have one, I don't want to lose you." Edward cried too, holding the boy as if he could protect him from all the evils of the world, just with the strength of his embrace. "You won't lose me, son. I promise." Later that night, after Gabriel fell asleep, Edward received an unexpected call. It was Sarah Jennings, and she sounded agitated. "Edward, I found out who's behind the complaint." "Who?" "Marcus. I found evidence on his computer. Emails to a law firm specializing in child advocacy. Wire transfers to a private investigation firm. He orchestrated everything." Edward felt his blood boil. "Do you have proof?" "Oh, not legal proof. We'd need a court order to officially access those files, but I have unofficial copies that clearly show his involvement." "Where is Marcus now?" "He left early today. Said he was going to an external meeting, but one of the secretaries saw him in the parking lot making a call. She heard him say, 'The operation is underway. Soon I will have total control of the company.'" Edward hung up and immediately called Mr. Monroe. "I found out who's behind the complaint. I need your help to gather admissible evidence." The next morning, Gabriel woke up with a high fever. Edward called the family doctor, Dr. Ralph Bennett, who examined the boy carefully. "It's stress," the doctor diagnosed in private. "The anxiety is manifesting physically. Gabriel is somatizing his worries." "He's only 9 years old," Edward said, watching Gabriel sleep restlessly in bed. "Children who have been through abandonment trauma develop a heightened sensitivity to any sign of rejection. For Gabriel, this investigation represents the threat of losing everything he loves all over again." Edward spent the entire day caring for Gabriel, placing cool compresses on his forehead, reading stories, and singing lullabies he didn't even know he knew. When Gabriel awoke in a delirium, he would murmur things like, "Don't let me go and promise you'll come get me." At 3 p.m., 2 social workers arrived at the house for an unscheduled inspection. Edward received them in the living room, trying to stay calm as they examined every room of the mansion with critical eyes. "The child's room is excessively luxurious," commented one of them, a thin woman with glasses. "This can create unrealistic expectations about living standards." "Gabriel deserves the best I can offer," Edward replied dryly. "And where is he now?" "Sick in bed with a fever." The 2 women exchanged significant looks. "Coincidentally sick on the day of our visit." Edward controlled the urge to explode. "You can speak with the doctor who examined him this morning." They insisted on seeing Gabriel, even though he was feverish. Edward led them to the room where they found the boy awake but clearly weak. "Hi, Gabriel," said the younger social worker, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts," Gabriel answered honestly, "and I'm scared." "Scared of what?" Gabriel looked at Edward, then back at the woman. Scared you'll take me away from Papa Edward. No one will take you anywhere if you're being well cared for, she replied. But I need you to tell me. Do you feel pressured to study very difficult things? Gabriel frowned, confused. Pressured? I like to study. Math is fun. But don't you think you should be playing with normal toys instead of messing with airplanes? Airplanes are my favorite toys. Papa Edward always asks if I want to help. He never makes me. The social worker made notes on her clipboard. And do you have friends your age? Gabriel hesitated. At school, some of the boys don't like me very much. They say I'm weird for liking numbers. Edward saw the two women exchange another significant look, as if Gabriel had just confirmed some suspicion. After they left, Edward returned to Gabriel's room and found the boy crying silently. They're going to take me, aren't they? Gabriel asked, his voice choked. Edward lay down on the bed beside the boy, pulling him into a protective hug. Gabriel, I need to tell you something important. The boy tensed, bracing for more bad news. A man who works with me, who is angry because you are smarter than he is trying to cause problems for us. He lied to those people, said things that aren't true. Mr. Marcus, Edward was surprised. How do you know? He always looks at me with angry eyes. And yesterday when I was leaving school, I saw him talking to a man in a suit near the gate. He pointed at me and the man took pictures. Edward felt a cold fury spread through his chest. Gabriel, I'm going to fix this, but I need you to be very brave for a few days. Can you do that for me? Gabriel nodded, though he still looked frightened. Papa Edward, if they take me, will you come find me? Edward held Gabriel's small face between his hands. I would move mountains to find you. I would fight the whole world to bring you back. Do you believe me? I believe you. Then sleep tight. Papa is here to protect you. That night, while Gabriel finally slept without a fever, Edward made a call to an old friend from college, Charles Mendonza, now a judge at the State Court of Appeals. Charles, I need a favor, a big one. Name it, Edward. Edward explained the whole situation, from Marcus's conspiracy to the threats against the adoption process. Charles listened in silence before replying. Edward, what you're telling me is very serious. If there's really evidence of a malicious complaint and conspiracy, I have evidence, Charles, and I have witnesses. Then we'll act fast. But you need to be prepared. If we fail, you could lose Gabriel for good. The judicial system doesn't like to be challenged. Charles, that boy is my son. I don't care what the risk is. All right, I'll prepare a petition for tomorrow morning. And Edward? Yes? Pray we have enough evidence, because if Marcus really has political backing, this is going to be the fight of your life. Edward hung up the phone and went up to Gabriel's room. He found the boy awake, looking out the window at the stars. Can't sleep? Edward asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. I'm talking to Dad, Gabriel replied simply, touching the small cross on his neck. Asking him to help me stay with you. Edward swallowed hard. And what is he saying? Gabriel smiled for the first time in 2 days. That sometimes God allows storms to show how much people truly love each other, and that after the storm the sky is always more beautiful. Edward kissed Gabriel's forehead, marveling at the wisdom the child carried. Your father really was a very wise man. He was. And he told me that you're a real dad now, that a father's heart isn't about blood, it's about love. As Gabriel finally drifted off to sleep, Edward stayed awake, planning every move of the battle to come. Because tomorrow, he wouldn't just be fighting for his company or his reputation, he would be fighting for the right to be a father to a child who had already lost everything once, and who deserved to finally know what unconditional love was. And no matter who was on the other side of this war, Edward Stanton was willing to sacrifice everything to protect his little genius. The storm outside was beginning to subside, but the real storm was just beginning. Friday morning dawned heavy with an electric tension that seemed to contaminate the Chicago air. Edward woke up at 5 a.m. after a sleepless night and found Gabriel already awake in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a half-empty glass of milk and a thoughtful expression. Good morning, son. How are you feeling today? Gabriel looked up, and Edward noticed a new determination in his eyes, something that hadn't been there in the previous days. Better, Papa Edward. I had an idea during the night. What kind of idea? An idea to prove that the mean people are lying about us. Before Edward could ask for details, his phone rang. It was Mr. Monroe, and his voice was urgent. Edward, we have bigger problems. The hearing has been set for today at 2 p.m., and there's more. Marcus has gotten the support of 3 state representatives who are applying political pressure. They're claiming that your exploitation of Gabriel could create a dangerous precedent for other companies to use children. Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the injustice. Henry, this is insane. Gabriel is not exploited. I know you know, but they've created a convincing narrative. And there's more. The press will be there. Marcus leaked the story to 3 different newspapers. When Edward hung up, Gabriel approached and held his hand with his small ones. Papa Edward, trust me today, okay? I have a plan. Gabriel, this isn't a child's game. These are powerful people trying to separate us. I know, but Jesus gave me this brain for a reason, didn't he? Maybe it was for this moment. At 10 a.m., an emergency call came into Aerotech. Sarah answered, pale with worry. Edward, we have a crisis. The Condor X prototype, which was supposed to be presented to the international delegation this afternoon, has a critical failure in its navigation system. If we don't fix it by 2, we lose the most important export contract in the company's history. Edward felt his world collapsing. Not only was he fighting to keep Gabriel, but now he also faced the possible bankruptcy of everything he had built. What kind of failure? The navigation system is crashing during high-speed maneuvers. 3 of our best engineers have been trying to solve it since last night. No one can identify the problem. Gabriel, who had been listening beside Edward, suddenly lit up. Papa, can I see the technical data? Gabriel, you can't come to the company, remember? The investigation? But you can bring the papers here, can't you? It's not against the law for me to look at papers at home. Edward hesitated, but the urgency of the situation won out. Sarah, bring all the technical data to my house. Now. 30 minutes later, the mansion's dining table was covered with technical reports, circuit diagrams, and computer code printouts. Gabriel studied everything with the concentration of a surgeon, his 9-year-old mind processing information that challenged experienced engineers. Here, he said suddenly, pointing to a specific line of code. The problem is the synchronization between the GPS and the inertial system. When the plane flies too fast, the 2 systems start to disagree about where they are. Sarah, who had arrived with Robert and 2 other engineers, looked where Gabriel was pointing. My God, he's right. How did we not see this? Because you were looking for a big problem, Gabriel explained patiently. But sometimes the small problems cause the biggest damage. It's like when a little pebble in your shoe makes you limp. In 20 minutes, Gabriel had not only identified the problem, but had also sketched out the solution. A simple correction algorithm that would make the 2 systems communicate better. Gabriel, Robert was clearly emotional. You just saved our company, again. But the joy was interrupted by an aggressive knock on the door. Edward opened it to find 2 social workers, accompanied by 2 police officers and Marcus Damon. Edward Stanton, said one of the social workers in an official voice. We are here to escort Gabriel Stone to a temporary shelter while the investigation of child exploitation continues. Gabriel hid behind Edward, his eyes wide with terror. You don't have authorization for this, Edward protested. Yes, we do, Marcus spoke for the first time, showing a document. A court order issued an hour ago. Based on evidence of continued intellectual exploitation, Edward looked at the paper and felt his blood run cold. It was a legitimate order, signed by a judge who had clearly been influenced by political pressure. Gabriel is not going anywhere, Edward said, placing the boy behind him. Mr. Stanton, one of the police officers said firmly but not hostilely, don't make this harder than it has to be. It's only temporary. Gabriel stepped forward, his voice trembling but determined. Can I speak before you take me? Everyone looked at the boy, surprised. Gabriel, you don't have to, Edward began. I have to, Papa. Gabriel took a deep breath as if preparing for the most important speech of his life. Mr. Marcus, why are you doing this to me? Marcus seemed uncomfortable with the direct question. Child, you don't understand adult matters. Yes, I do. I understand that you worked at Papa Edward's company for a long time and got angry when I helped solve the airplane problem. I understand that you think you deserve more recognition. The room fell silent. Gabriel, Edward murmured, impressed by the boy's perception. But Mr. Marcus, Gabriel continued, his tears beginning to fall, I didn't want to take anything from you. I just wanted to help. And now, because of your anger, I'm losing my daddy again. Marcus avoided the boy's gaze, but Gabriel didn't stop. "Do you have children?" "I do," Marcus answered reluctantly. "And if someone tried to take your children from you just because they were angry, how would you feel?" For the first time, Marcus seemed genuinely shaken, but maintained his facade. "This is different. My children aren't orphans." Gabriel completed the sentence Marcus didn't have the courage to finish. "It's true. I'm the orphan. My dad died when I was little, and my mom abandoned me. But you know what I learned? Family isn't just blood. Family is love." Gabriel's tears were falling freely now, but his voice remained steady. "Papa Edward truly loves me. He never forced me to do anything. He never treated me like I was strange for liking math. He made me feel special, not weird." One of the social workers discreetly wiped her own eyes. "And now," Gabriel continued, "because of lies, I'm going to lose the only person who made me feel like I had value. I'm going back to the shelter, where I'll lie awake at night, imagining what it would be like to have a real dad. Even though I already had one and you took him from me." Gabriel turned to Edward, climbing onto a chair to be taller so he could hug him properly. "Papa Edward, thank you for showing me what it feels like to be loved. Even if I have to go, I will always remember that for a few months I had a real dad." Edward was now crying openly, holding Gabriel as if he could shield him from the world just by the force of his embrace. "You will always be my son, Gabriel, always." It was at that moment that Sarah stepped forward, holding the technical papers that Gabriel had just solved. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the social workers. "Did you see what just happened here?" "Pertars, what do you mean?" one of them asked. "In the last 30 minutes, while you were on your way to protect this child from exploitation, Gabriel just single-handedly solved a technical problem that will save hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars. Not because he was forced, but because he saw people who needed help." Sarah showed them the calculations Gabriel had made. "This right here is the work of a genius, and it wasn't done out of pressure or exploitation. It was done out of love. Love for the family he has found, love for the company that has become his second home." Robert joined Sarah. "I have 3 children, and I can assure you this boy is not being exploited. He is being loved and nurtured in the way every child should be." Marcus, seeing the situation slipping from his control, tried to regain authority. "That doesn't change the fact that there is a court order. Feelings don't nullify the law." That's when Gabriel had his last brilliant idea. "Officer," he said, addressing the more sympathetic-looking policeman, "can you give me 5 minutes on the computer before you take me?" "Gabriel, no," Edward protested. "Trust me, Papa." The officer, visibly moved by the situation, nodded. 5 minutes." Gabriel went to the laptop in the living room and began typing quickly. In a few minutes, he had accessed the Aerotech email system, not illegally, but using the password Edward had given him to play with simulators. "Done," Gabriel said, turning the screen for everyone to see. "Here are Mr. Marcus's emails to the law firm, and here are the wire transfers to hire private investigators to spy on me at school." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Marcus went completely pale. "How did you—" "You forgot to delete the emails from your sent folder," Gabriel explained simply. "And you left your banking screen open on your computer yesterday when you left for lunch. I saw it when I passed by your office with Papa Edward." One of the social workers took the laptop and examined the evidence. Her face gradually transformed into an expression of growing outrage. This is a documented conspiracy against a child," she muttered, her eyes scanning the messages. "Mr. Damon, did you orchestrate a false complaint?" Marcus tried to deny it, but the evidence was irrefutable. In the emails, he openly discussed his strategy to remove the boy from the company and regain control. "This changes the entire picture," the other social worker said. "If the complaint was made in bad faith—" "It was," Gabriel said sadly, "and all because I tried to help. I just wanted the planes to be safe for people to fly in." The older police officer addressed Marcus with a stern voice. "Sir, are you aware that filing a false report is a crime, especially when it involves a child?" Marcus, realizing he was cornered, exploded. "You don't understand. I built this company, I worked day and night for years, and then this street kid shows up, and in one afternoon gets all the credit for my work." "Your work?" Gabriel asked innocently. "But, Mr. Marcus, you yourself said you tried to solve the airplane problem for 2 years and couldn't. I didn't take anything from you. I just offered a new idea. The simplicity and sincerity of Gabriel's response made Marcus's pettiness even more apparent. "Enough," Edward said, finally finding his voice. "Marcus, you are fired, not just from the company but from my life. How could you try to destroy an innocent child?" "Edward, you can't." "I can and I am. Security!" Edward called, and two company security guards who had arrived with Sarah stepped forward. "Escort Mr. Damon off my property now." As Marcus was led out, protesting and threatening, the social workers huddled for a quick consultation. "Mr. Stanton," the older one said, "in light of this new evidence and considering the child's clearly demonstrated well-being, the removal order is suspended. But we will need a full psychological evaluation of Gabriel to definitively close the case." Gabriel ran to Edward, who picked him up in his arms, both of them crying with relief. "It's over, son. It's over, Papa Edward," Gabriel whispered in his ear. "Jesus really doesn't abandon orphans. No, my son. He never does." At that moment, Edward's phone rang. It was Sarah, who had quickly returned to the company. "Edward, you need to turn on the TV, now." Edward turned on the set and found a live press conference. On the screen, 3 state representatives, the same ones who had backed Marcus, were making statements about child protection and regulating the use of minors in corporate activities. "As you can see," one of them was saying, "we are taking firm measures to prevent companies from exploiting vulnerable children for commercial purposes." Gabriel watched for a few seconds, then looked at Edward with determination in his eyes. "Papa, can we go to the company now? I think those gentlemen need to know the truth." Edward smiled, recognizing the special glint in his son's eyes, the one that appeared whenever Gabriel was about to surprise the world again. "You bet we can, son. You bet we can." As they drove to Aerotech, Gabriel held Edward's hand tightly, preparing for what would be his greatest test yet, to face not just an envious man, but an entire political system that had tried to use him as a pawn in its power games. But this time he wouldn't be alone. He would have by his side not only the man he had chosen as a father, but also the truth. And Gabriel had learned that the truth in the right hands was the most powerful weapon in the world. The auditorium at the state capitol building was packed beyond capacity. Journalists from across the country, representatives from the aerospace industry, educators, politicians, and curious onlookers squeezed in to witness what had become the most talked about case in the nation. The public hearing on the Boy G and the limits of special education. Gabriel walked down the central aisle, holding Edward's hand tightly, his small steps echoing in the tense silence of the room. He wore his best navy blue suit, like the skies he loved so much, and on his chest he wore his small wooden cross, now polished and bright, like a beacon of hope. In the front rows sat the 3 representatives who had orchestrated the hearing. Representative Alan Norton, rapporteur of the Committee for the Defense of Children's Rights, Representative Sandra Vance, known for her campaigns against child exploitation, and Representative Charles Monroe, an expert in educational legislation. On the other side, Sarah Jennings, Robert Fisher, and the entire Aerotech Dynamics team showed their silent support. In the upper galleries, blue t-shirts with the phrase "Gabriel's Guardians" identified dozens of children from the St. Teresa's Shelter and other institutions who had received special permission to attend. "Papa Edward," Gabriel whispered as they settled at the table designated for the accused. "I'm nervous." "Me too, son. But remember, you've done nothing wrong. Just be yourself." Representative Norton banged the gavel, opening the session. His voice reverberated through the sound system with pompous authority. "We are here today to analyze a case that exposes fundamental questions about the limits of childhood education and the protection of minors against intellectual exploitation." He looked directly at Gabriel. "This boy, Gabriel Stone, has become a symbol of a national debate about how far we can demand performance from a child." Gabriel straightened his back in the chair that was too high for him, his feet swinging slightly in the air. "Mr. Stone," the representative continued, "do you understand why we are all here today?" Gabriel nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir, because some people think Papa Edward is hurting me by letting me study things I like." A murmur went through the auditorium. The simplicity of Gabriel's answer contrasted sharply with the political complexity of the situation. "And do you think you are being hurt?" asked Representative Vance, leaning forward with a forced maternal expression. Gabriel thought carefully before answering, just as Edward had taught him. Representative Vance, may I ask a question first? You may, of course. Do you have children? I have two. And if your children like to draw a lot, would you let them draw a lot? Well, yes, of course. And if they like to play the piano, you would let them do that too. Gabriel smiled with the genuine innocence of a child making a discovery. So why can't I like math and airplanes? Is it different from drawing and playing the piano? The question struck the heart of the debate with surgical precision. Sandra Vance exchanged uncomfortable glances with her colleagues. The issue, Gabriel, intervened Representative Monroe, is that advanced mathematics and aeronautical engineering can be excessive pressure for a 9-year-old mind. But, Mr. Representative, Gabriel answered politely, I don't think it's pressure. I think it's fun. It's like when you watch football on Sunday. Do you feel pressured or do you have fun? I have fun, but then it's the same. I have fun with numbers. And when I solve a hard problem, I feel as happy as when my team scores a touchdown. Stifled laughter began to emerge from the galleries. Gabriel was, without realizing it, disarming complex political arguments with irrefutable childish logic. Gabriel, Representative Vance tried a different approach. But don't you miss playing with other boys your age? Playing video games, running in the park? Gabriel's eyes filled with a momentary sadness. Ma'am, may I tell a story? You may, son. Gabriel took a deep breath, unconsciously touching his cross. Before I lived with Papa Edward, I was at the St. Teresa's shelter. There were a lot of kids there, and yes, we played together. But at night, when everyone was asleep, I would stay awake, looking at the stars through the window. The auditorium was in absolute silence. I would imagine my dad in heaven watching me, and I would promise him that I would use the brain Jesus gave me to help people. Because Dad always said our gifts aren't just for us, they're to make the world a better place. Several people in the audience discreetly wiped their eyes. So when I met Papa Edward, and he let me help with the airplanes, it wasn't work. It was like I was keeping a promise to my real dad in heaven. Edward placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder, too emotional to speak. And now, Gabriel continued, his voice growing firmer, I have two dads protecting me, one in heaven and one here on earth. They both taught me that real love isn't controlling what we do, it's supporting us in who we are. Representative Vance was visibly shaken. Gabriel, but what if you want to change your mind tomorrow? What if you decide you don't like math anymore? Gabriel smiled with the surprising wisdom that sometimes emerged from his innocence. Then Papa Edward will support me in that too, because he loves me not just for what I can do, but for who I am. Edward finally found his voice. May I speak, Your Honors? Representative Norton nodded permission. Edward stood up, placing a protective hand on Gabriel's shoulder. Honorable representatives, I understand your concern. As a society, we must protect our children, but protection cannot mean limiting potential. He looked directly into the TV cameras. Gabriel is not exploited at my company. He is celebrated. He is not forced to perform. He is encouraged to explore. He is not treated like a precocious adult. He is loved as the extraordinary child he is. Mr. Stanton, Representative Monroe interrupted. But how can we ensure that other companies don't use this as a precedent to exploit minors? Before Edward could answer, Gabriel stood up on his chair asking to speak. His voice, though high-pitched and childish, cut through the air with impressive moral authority. Mr. Representative, can I explain the difference? You may, Gabriel. When a child is exploited, they are forced to do things they don't want. They aren't taken care of properly, and people get rich by using them. When a child is loved, they do what they enjoy, they are always protected, and they use their gifts to help others. Gabriel pointed to Edward. Papa Edward didn't get rich because of me. He was already rich. He adopted me because he loves me, not because I'm useful. The boy then pointed to the galleries where the other children were. And you know what else? Papa Edward is building special schools for kids like me. Kids who think differently, so that no child who loves math or science will ever feel weird. A wave of spontaneous applause began in the galleries and spread throughout the entire auditorium. Several adults were clearly moved. When the noise subsided, Gabriel continued, now speaking directly to the cameras as if he were a small statesman. I want to say something to all the kids who are watching. If you are different, if you like things that others find strange, that's not a bad thing. God made each of us special for a reason, and there is always someone who will love you for who you are, not for what you do. Tears were now flowing freely down the faces of many present, including some of the representatives. And to the adults, Gabriel continued with the seriousness of a child philosopher, please don't be afraid of smart children. We should be afraid of wasted talent. We should be afraid of making special children feel broken. Representative Norton discreetly wiped his eyes before speaking. Gabriel, you have given us a great deal to think about today. Can I say one more thing, Mr. Representative? Of course. Gabriel climbed down from the chair and walked to the center of the auditorium, his small figure radiating a presence that belied his age. I was a sad boy at the shelter. I had a good brain, but I thought that made me weird. I thought I would never have a family because I was too different. His voice choked with emotion. But then God sent Papa Edward into my life, and he taught me that being different is being special, that my intelligence is a gift, not a problem. Gabriel turned to Edward, holding out his arms. Edward immediately left the table and knelt to receive his son's embrace. Papa Edward gave me something worth more than money. He gave me unconditional love. He gave me a family. He gave me the right to be who I am without shame. Father and son hugged in the center of that auditorium, under the flashes of dozens of cameras, but completely oblivious to the outside world. In that moment, there were only the two of them and the love that bound them. And now, Gabriel said, still hugging Edward but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, I want to use my gifts to help other orphan children find families that will love them for who they are. Because every child deserves to have someone who believes in them. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. Even the representatives stood up, visibly moved. The children in the galleries shouted, Gabriel! Gabriel! With pure admiration. When the emotion finally subsided, Representative Norton banged his gavel with solemnity. After hearing everything that has been presented today, and especially after hearing from the child himself, who is at the center of this issue, I declare this case closed. There is no exploitation here. There is only paternal love and the development of exceptional talent. He looked directly at Gabriel. Young man, you have taught us today that child protection does not mean limiting potential, but ensuring that children are loved and supported in their unique gifts. 3 months later, in an intimate ceremony at the Chicago courthouse, Gabriel Stone officially became Gabriel Stone Stanton. He signed the adoption papers himself in neat handwriting, using a gold pen Edward had bought especially for the occasion. Now we're family forever, Edward said, hugging his officially adopted son. We always were, Gabriel replied, touching his cross. Now the papers just agree with our hearts. A year later, the Gabriel Stone Stanton Foundation had been established, identifying and supporting gifted children in underserved communities across the country. The boy who once slept in a shelter now ensured that other special children would never feel alone or inadequate. In the Aerotech Dynamics office, a framed photo showed Gabriel and Edward on the day of the adoption. Beside it, a golden plaque read, dedicated to all the children who dream of flying, not just with airplanes, but with their unique gifts. And on clear Chicago nights, when the boy who revolutionized American aviation looked out the windows of his new home, he still talked to the stars. No longer asking for a family, but giving thanks for having found not only a father, but also his own power to transform the world through love. Gabriel Stone Stanton had proven that sometimes the greatest miracles come in the smallest packages, and that true love doesn't just accept our differences, it celebrates them, protects them, and turns them into forces capable of changing the world.